Okay.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. This is Rhonda Mays, the Executive Director of the Fair Housing Council of the Capital Region. We are so happy to present the first of what we plan to be bi-weekly discussions on rental issues that we call Ask the Counselor, where we will choose some of the common questions our counselors receive through our landlord-tenant helpline. And this evening, we're filming this in the late afternoon. I am so happy to have with us our board chairman, Claude Phipps. In addition to being a board chairman at the Fair Housing Council, he was also a candidate for Harrisburg Magisterial Judge and has passed the qualification test for the position. Mr. Phipps also generously takes the time to provide test training for other aspiring MDJs. So I can think of no one better to join us for our inaugural edition of Ask the Counselor than Claude. Thank you for joining us, Claude.
Thank you very much, Rhonda. So we filled a lot of questions over the years, and I field questions from Fair Housing. I also field questions from neighbors. Okay, and when I tell people up front, I am not an attorney, but I know what the law basically states for tenant landlord and for contracts. So and that's what we basically stay within those parameters.
That's great. So I know that you're really proficient at these kinds of questions, not just landlord-tenant, but, a whole lot of different legal situations and issues that community members will find themselves facing. But here at the council, we field about 2,000 landlord-tenant calls every year from across the state of Pennsylvania because, let's face it, PA landlord-tenant law is the same in Dauphin County and Harrisburg and Perry County and Cumberland County, which is our primary area of service, but it's also the same across the state of Pennsylvania. So the Fair Housing Council is maybe one, if not close to the only agency that has this sort of service that we provide for community members. So what we decided to do is have a little bi-weekly discussion to ask some of the common questions that we receive here through our landlord-tenant helpline, and have those who are, knowledgeable in the know about the answers to help the community to learn a little bit about their rights and responsibilities. I always say and make clear that similar to Claude, that we are not attorneys, but we have been focusing on housing issues, particularly landlord-tenant and homeownership, for about over 50 years now. So we are pretty confident in our ability to give responsible guidance and information to community members. But if you do find that you need an attorney for your particular issue, and you need legal advice, please do not hesitate to do so. So I'm going to start out with one question that we receive a lot at the Fair Housing Council. And that would be, my landlord won't make repairs on my unit, on my rental. Do I have to pay rent?
It's a good one. The answer to that, I can give you a 60-second answer or a 5-second answer. Yes, you have to pay rent. The issue will rise is what are the terms of the lease. In the lease, does the lease basically state who's responsible for providing repair to the property? Some leases have it built in there. Some leases don't. When you get your lease, look for those types of clauses. Who is responsible for the upkeep of the property? And that's basically what you're saying, the upkeep of the property. If the repair puts the property into disarray, whereas it becomes a codes violation, then it falls on the landlord. Okay, if it's not a codes violation, okay, the tenant basically it's not specifically defined in the lease. This is where the tenant should sit down, work something out with the landlord. But we always said use the word nuclear option. Failure to pay rent is the nuclear option. You never want to do that with a landlord, okay? Because at that point in time, your lease is a contract, okay? That can be a breakage of a contract, and there's some legal ramifications for that, okay? Some of it can fall on the tenant landlord, but some of the breakage could be a simple breakage of a contract. And you're giving a lot of leverage to the landlord at that point for failure to pay rent. Now, he has responsibility. You can basically, as long as the repairs don't exceed what you would pay on a monthly basis for rent, you could do a repair and deduct it from your rent. But before you do that, make sure you notify the landlord. I believe in doing everything in writing. Okay, in writing, you want it written, you want a timestamp on that, so that you've had some formal communication of what your intent. And the word intent is big here. Okay, what was your intent? Your intent is to pay rent on time, but you have to make repairs. And the landlord has not responded back to you. At that point in time, you can basically, as long as the repair does not exceed whatever what your monthly rent would be, you can do that. You can deduct that from your rent. But you need to keep receipts. You need to get, and it has to be very well documented. And that's why you want that communication before time. Was this documented and communicated to the landlord? You're showing intent. Okay. If his failure to respond, that also, from a legal standpoint, and as a judge, I would look at intent here big. He didn't respond to you. You have every right at that point in time to basically get the repair, make it the temporary repair, okay, and then come back and ask the landlord to basically, what are you going to do? If the damage brings the property into an issue with the codes part, the City of Harrisburg codes, or whatever municipality codes organization, it's out of your hands at that point. You notify codes, and then the landlord will be held responsible. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there are big repairs and there are small repairs, yes. Right? So it's all depending what you would do. All depends on how big of a problem it is, because we do know that people have a right to a habitable home.
Right.
So a small repair might be, my sink is leaking. And, that you have an issue with the water bill going up, and, but that could be a minor fix. And if the landlord is being slow with coming in, and it's been going on for a couple of months, and the landlord just isn't being responsive about getting the faucet fixed, then, if you have $1,200 a month rent and the fix is $250, then you may be able to go ahead and do a repair and deduct, as long as you noted, communicate with the landlord about your intent to get this fixed as soon as possible. Especially nowadays, when a lot of people are responsible for the water bill. Yes. They don't want that water bill to go up unreasonably just because the landlord is being slow with the small repair. Now, if it's a huge repair, like there's a big hole in the wall, or the ceiling collapsed, and
that falls under health, safety, and welfare.
Yeah, now you might be talking about codes and all of that other kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, so that's a whole different issue. and so, but like I said, it all depends.
The amount
So,
and minor repair. Okay.
right.
And again, if it's really minor, again, if you're a good tenant and you want to basically, I won't say stay in the landlord's good graces, but both vice versa. The landlord wants to be in your good graces too. They'll be responsive, but communication and intent, that's the key
Right.
here.
And sometimes we get, tenants who will say, well, he didn't make this repair, and I had this huge a hole in my wall, and, rodents are getting in, and all this kind of stuff, and I'm just not going to pay my rent. No, we have to tell them there's a process for that, because as you said, not paying your rent is a violation of your contract, and most definitely call the council or legal counsel before you withhold rent, so that you can get an idea of what that process looks like, because you have to be very careful about things like that. But if your landlord, generally, if the landlord won't make repairs, do I have to pay rent? Well, it depends. That's what we're saying. So
your lease is going to use your lease as your guidance. Okay, if it's not in the lease, I would err if in a protection mode. You pay the rent, okay, or you pay some portion of the rent. But this is where notice is important.
But the communication is important.
Yes.
But like I said, it all depends. Like most things in life, it depends on the circumstances.
Yes.
Right. So in general, you should be paying your rent. But if it gets to a severe situation, then you do have rights and responsibilities as a tenant in the state of Pennsylvania. That you do have options. You do have a way of trying to get the unit back into a decent, habitable condition, and if the landlord is not cooperating with that.
Well, you said something earlier, and I taught some magistrates, and I've got some that live in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a little bit different. Okay, most of the MDJs handle tenant-landlord, with the exception of Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, they have their own court for tenant-landlord. Right. They tend to, I hate to say it, they will favor the tenant more in the Philadelphia area. I don't know how Pittsburgh, but they lean more towards the tenant. Maybe it has to do with population, density of population, availability of property, but the tenant has a bigger voice there. He has a bigger club that he can swing. In areas in Harrisburg and some of the rural areas, you're most of the time the DJ, okay, or the magistrate. He has a lot of control over what's going to take place, and most of the times they favor and I may get in trouble for this, but they favor the landlord. Okay, most times the landlords come into court, they've got a certain amount of law that's going to back them up. Okay, and they know how to swing it. Okay, sometimes they try to browbeat us and beat us into saying, well, I bring an attorney in and argue the case and stuff. And some some DJs they basically get intimidated by that, and they'll tend to favor.
Well, I can say that no matter where you are within the state, landlords kind of have an upper hand, because a lot of them will have an attorney, or at least will have been doing a property manager, or they've been doing this for quite a while, and they know, PA landlord tenant law. Yes. They know what they can do, what they can't do. Some of them, tiptoe on the line, more than they should. But, they kind of have the upper hand on the tenant, which most tenants just want a decent place to live. Right. And when they run into issues with that, then, they could call us, and we can try to help guide them to see if they can, come to terms and resolve the issue. Now, Philadelphia, you're exactly right. I always call them, excuse me, Philadelphians, but the sovereign state of Philly. Things are kind of different with them.
Bit, yes.
However, PA landlord-tenant law applies no matter where you are. The processes are just a little bit different, I think, in Philly. But Philly also has a lot of, they have organizations, they have nonprofits that people can contact to get information from if they need to, and that one-to-one information based on what's going on with the first-class city, which is Philly, and the second-class city, which is Pittsburgh, and then everyone else, the third class. So, but yeah, PA landlord-tenant is pretty much, so no matter where you are in the state, even if you're in Philly, we will be able to answer
any
questions.
Property that you rent, where you're in a tenant-landlord agreement, there's a writ of habitability. The place has to, again, whether it's in the lease, it's an implied, okay, which means that it does not be in a lease. The state will enforce that. It has to be the place has to be inhabitable, which means that if you go to rent a place and you see the holes in the walls or something, before you rent, you call codes, make sure that place is up to snuff. Okay, if not, now you got an issue too, because if you go into it and they're still going to be held liable to the writ of habitability, whether it's stated in the lease or whether it's implied. And if it's implied, they're going to still be held. The landlord's feet are still going to be held to the fire.
Right. Okay. You may not want to call codes before you start renting the place. It's really important to go in and walk through. Yeah. I know the housing market right now is really tight, especially for low to moderate income households. But it's important to still do the walkthroughs. Gotcha. And anything that you see that is not right, point it out, maybe even take pictures, talk to the landlord about it. A lot of times they'll say, oh yeah, we'll fix that before you move in. And then 3 months later after you moved in, it still isn't fixed. A year later, it's still not fixed. So, but yeah, I would definitely walk through and look at everything, make a note and discuss it with the landlord and put it in writing. Text message, email, the timestamp is important.
Yes.
Okay. Let's go on to the next question. Okay. We get this sometimes too. So if I owe back rent and pay before the court date, do I need to show up for court?
Yes. Yes. In civil law, it's a little bit different than criminal law. Preponderance of evidence is what you basically use as your measuring stick. Okay, whoever possesses the most evidence wins the case. Failure to show either party results in a default judgment. Okay, so you're the defendant, you're the person who's renting place, on the side you settled up with your back rent, but that case gets docketed. It means it goes in front of a judge. You do not show. Whatever was on that docket and the amount that was there, the judge has no latitude. It is a default judgment against you. It's automatic.
Now, let me ask you this. Okay, so a lot of times someone will owe back rent. Mm-hmm. They know how much they owe, and they pay the landlord like a couple of days before the court date. So the landlord a lot of times will withdraw that case. Yes. They'll go and say, cancel it, take it up. But if it's a couple of days, how would you know that that case was withdrawn? The tenant.
How would the tenant know? Well, the tenant,
if the landlord doesn't tell them.
Okay, so the tenant would have been served with documents basically saying you're required to appear at a specific time and date. Okay, that DJ who issued that appearance I would call this a summons. It's not like a summons, but you're required to appear. You would basically contact the DJ's office ahead of time and say, is this case still on? I've satisfied the requirement.
And take the receipt or the canceled check or...
Yes, but there's something to the landlord. If that debt was satisfied, he fails to withdraw it. Okay, he has to give a notice. He has to give a notice back to the court saying that this has been satisfied. And failure to do that, there's a penalty clause that he's going to incur.
Oh.
It's 2 times the amount of what he's asked for. Okay.
Really?
Failure. If a tenant satisfies the debt, the landlord has 60 days to notify the court that debt has been satisfied. Failure to do that, the tenant can now, the tenant becomes a plaintiff and it flips. He can now sue the landlord and it's 2 times the amount.
Okay, he can't sue this. So he would need to, or the tenant would need to go to the MDJ and file a civil
suit. Yes.
A civil suit.
Right, and that would be that's a civil suit. That would be tenant landlord. Civil suit, basically, failure for, he didn't get proper notices. He did not get notice. The court didn't get notice that was satisfied, and he didn't get notice that was satisfied, and he should have. What the landlord would do at that situation, if it's satisfied outside of court before the hearing, get to the DJ and cancel the complaint. Right. Okay, that's it. All he's going to do is he's going to lose whatever filing fees were and service fees. That's the cheapest way out for the landlord. But the tenant, once you receive that, you must appear. Now, in Pennsylvania, for a tenant landlord, if this is a tenant landlord issue, there are no default judgments in tenant landlord. That is the only place in civil law that there's no default judgment for failure to appear. The case will be heard. So when I said first default judgment, no. A tenant landlord is the only civil type of suit where the case must be heard, which means that if the tenant doesn't show up, the landlord's going to put his case in front of the judge. Now, most times he'll put the case, the judge will read it. Tenant's not here.
Fine for the landlord.
Right, but he has to hear it. In other situations where it's not tenant landlord, when it's civil law, whoever does not show loses the case. It's automatic default judgment. He doesn't have to. He doesn't hold a hearing. It's an administrative process. He says, "Okay, it's 10 o'clock. Are they here? No. We'll give them 30 minutes or to close the day. They still have not showed up yet. Default judgment.
Okay.
Default. Okay.
All right. Well, okay. So let's switch it a little bit though. That's interesting information. So the tenant pays the landlord, and the landlord's like, well, I got my money. I'm not going to show up to court. But the tenant does because the landlord didn't withdraw it.
Judge, the landlord didn't put the evidence up. The tenant shows up
with the receipt.
With the receipts, he produces evidence. Judgment for the tenant.
Okay.
Okay, but the court still has to hear. We have to go through the motions of hearing that case.
So that's just simple.
Right, but if it's a contract or something, we don't even go through the motions. Whoever doesn't show up lost the case.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. Okay, so here's a nice little Latin term that we get sometimes. When folks need we were talking about filing fees, right?
Yes, filing fees.
So this is either at the MDJ level or at the Court of Common Pleas level, where we see at the Court of Common Pleas level with appeals, landlord-tenant cases, we see people need this a lot. Informa pauperis.
Yes.
What is it, and how, when can I file it?
Very easy. A form of pauperis. Think pauperis, since it's Latin, it's going to deal with money. Okay. Informal. Informal pauperis basically states that you don't want to get denied justice because you don't have the money for it. Okay. Everybody has a right to justice. If you don't have the money to basically pay the filing fees and the service fees, your courts are not locked out to you. You can basically say, I do not have the income to do this. Thus, you'll get the judge will sit down and say, complete the statement of finance. Okay, he says, okay, you can't have it. You don't have the money for it. What it says is that if there's any funds that's going to be awarded to you, if you win the case, and this is when, whoever wins the case, if they file, let's say both sides, they will basically, whoever wins, the filing fees and service fees will be deducted out of the winnings. Okay, but it doesn't stop the case. Okay, all you have to say is, I don't have the money, I can't afford it, and you can prove that you can't afford it. Now, what you don't do is go into court and say, I don't have it, and you're sitting with readies in your bank account, because you just committed perjury in writing. Okay, and you will get prosecuted for that. Okay, you don't do that. If you don't actually do not have the money, justice can, your day in court is not denied you because you don't have the funds. And that's what informed pauperous is. So if you don't have the money, but you think you've got a case, go through with it. You can basically say, I can't pay the filing fees, I can't pay the court costs, but if you win, we'll get our money out of whatever your proceedings are going to be, whatever your win's going to be. We take our cut first. Normally at our level, your court cost is 10%. Okay, the filing fees is your filing fees are 10%. Your service fees, now that's something you have to pay. Either to whatever cost a certified mail is, or an agent that'll actually serve the papers. You can serve, civil law, you can serve it yourself. I would not advise serving yourself because you want a record at all times, because lack of service will get a case dismissed. Mm-hmm. Okay, you have to have
That's
proof.
That's very important.
Lack of service, the case will be dismissed, and proof of service. And then in order to get the case reinstated, you got to pay some more money. Okay, so service is critical. You go to the DJ. The district judge will have a constable to perform service, or he can notify the county sheriff's department to conduct service. And service is that they're going to take that formal document and they're going to give it to somebody, and they're going to make somebody sign for it. Because again, that comes back to the court, and before you start a case, I look at it and say, okay, proof of service. I have to see it. I don't have proof of service. Well, you guys should be standing in front of me. There's no case here. Case dismissed.
Right. Okay. Well, we're almost at about a half an hour right now. So I think that we're going to ask the counselor to a close for this inaugural episode.
Every 2 weeks,
right?
We'll knock it on 2 more weeks. Again, I talk a lot, but again, a lot of questions are asked out of me. I also, I from the city standpoint, I'm not a zoning officer. I'm the chairman of the zoning board. Now, we're dealing with rental property here. I get a chance to see construction, requests for housing in the city. And I look at that and I review things, and I always say that my basis of review is going to be whatever the municipal codes are going to be, and whatever tenant landlord codes are going to be. Mm-hmm. That's my basis. I don't enforce the law, but I use it in my decision criteria. And all my decision criteria, since it's formal, because anything comes in front of me, it can be appealed to the Court of Common Pleas. I have a pretty good track record. I've never lost so far. Okay, people have appealed, and I tend to win because I stay within those boundaries. Okay, when in doubt, stay within the boundaries. Some DJs will do that. Some DJs are pretty straightforward, and some DJs won't. I have a friend who's a DJ in Norristown, and she needed to do an eviction for a person. The person was almost 80 years old. Mm. And she was not, and she said, she called me, she said, I'm not going to evict this lady. I'm not going to evict this lady. That's a slumlord. And I had to stop her. I said, stop. Did she pay the rent? No. Can she pay it? No. I said, was it pay or stay? In 10 days, you're going to basically sign for it. You're going to have to sign for order of possession. And she basically said to me, well, okay, well, fine. Well, I'm going to turn it in the codes because the slum property has stopped. That's the quickest way for a judge to get thrown off the bench. We're outside of our parameters. We can't reach out to another agency to do our work for us. We're not allowed to. We can't even make that call. Okay? you can make, whoever the defendant is, all we can inform them is that there are other means that you can use to basically get remedy to this. That's as far as we can go.
Right. And that's a good point. I mean, MDJs normally stay within their lane, but I can tell you that they know where they can refer people if they have questions or they have concerns about a tenant, because the MDJ is really a member of the community, right? We used to call them Justice of the Peace.
Yep.
And so MDJs don't necessarily have law degrees. A lot of them do, some of them don't. But they are here to make sure that, the community is stable and, within their responsibilities to the law, make sure that people get, proper justice within the system, and process and procedure is handled properly. But, MDJs, just like anyone else, are humans, and they see when unconscionable actions are taking place or people are in trouble, and because they live in these neighborhoods where they serve. So, that's where we get referrals sometimes from MDJs to say, hey, I can't tell you how you can get help with this, but give the council a call. Maybe they can give you some information.
Yes.
So we get that a lot. We get referrals from, from the courts sometimes. And so I can see if, they don't have those resources in another community, unfortunately, then, we can't tell someone that lives outside of Dauphin, Cumberland, or Perry County where the resources are. We just don't know. We don't have the information for every municipality across the state of Pennsylvania, but there are a lot of resources. We will look at the HUD website for other certified HUD certified housing counseling agencies that may be available within their region or community, and hopefully they'll be able to get help from them. But like I said, PA landlord-tenant law is the same across the state. So as long as we're sticking with rights and responsibilities underneath PA landlord-tenant, then we can normally help. But as far as helping with mediation, that one-to-one mediation and maybe resources to help someone get caught up with rent. If you live in someplace else outside the capital region, we would have to refer you to some other place. Right. But yeah, I mean, that's a good point. MDJs, they see a lot, some are very disturbing cases. And, and some they see over and over again. And that's a hard job to be, you deal with crime, you deal with eviction, you deal with everything. That's the gateway to the judicial system.
90-something% of all activities, whether civil or criminal, comes in front of the DJ. From basic setting bail to basically scheduling a hearing or a trial. Again, I'd say more than that, 98%. And the reason why the DJs were basically community based, because they know the communities. No two communities are the same.
Right.
Okay, they had their own different twerks. Okay, and need to be adjusted. The DJ uses called the book that you taught the law. Okay, and over 50% of DJs in Pennsylvania do not have a law degree. Okay, but they bring to the bench that life experience, that experience in the community, and a sense of fair play. And that's the one big thing, it's a sense of fair play.
Right.
Okay, they have to have that. In one class I had, advanced class, guy said, before you make a decision, you hear the evidence, and then before you make a decision, come off your bench, go around, and stand in that person's position. that you're going to make a decision on, whether it's criminal or civil, you'll always make the right decision for doing that because you're trying to have a lot of empathy with what you're hearing. And again, now you guys, some of those just, I get in trouble for this because I say this sometimes in front of a DJ. It's not cookie cutter justice and it's not railroad justice. In, out, in, out, in, out. I always tell people, give me something mitigate. When I hear them in zoning, talk to me.
Right.
Give me something. Okay.
And yeah.
For
so
mitigation.
A lot of that is talking back and forth, understanding exactly what's going on, processing that information, then applying it.
Yes.
You know, as you were trained to do, within the justice system.
Yes.
So,
Again, the
but
balance days. So I'll pick you up on this 2 weeks from now.
2 weeks from now.
Okay.
So you find this to be useful information. Feel free to email your questions into the Fair Housing Council, whether it's home purchase or landlord tenant. You know, shoot us an email. PA Fair Housing at pafairhousing.org. Okay.
Well,
thank you, Claude. It was a pleasure.
Yes,
I appreciate it.
Yes.
And everyone,
Have a great night.
see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.
This is good.